How we doing, guys? Welcome back to the Richie Hicks Jr. Sports Podcast. I'm here on part 2 of my NBA all-time rankings. I made a list 1 through 75, and in some of it, kind of a rebuttal to the list I saw that the NBA did going into the season, some of which I agreed with, and some of which I wasn't happy with. So I'm going to get on this list and kind of go over the players that I chose. Coming in at 49, I've got Billy Cunningham, one of the true athletic players of his time, one of the more athletic players of his era, and really became the franchise player for the Philadelphia 76ers once Wilt Chamberlain was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers. And some career accomplishments here for Billy Cunningham. 4-time All-Star, ABA MVP. He spent all of his career in Philadelphia, with the exception of his ABA years, as a coach and also a player. One of his biggest attributes was just phenomenal athleticism, as I already stated, and just a great vertical. Billy Cunningham, definitely a player that was ahead of his time. And, to lose a player like a Wilt Chamberlain and then to still be able to carry a franchise, I think speaks a lot about how great of a player Billy Cunningham was. Moving on, number 48, Klay Thompson. This is a guy that did not crack the all-time 75 list, and I think it was one of the more controversial ones. Just like when I think of great championship duos, you can't exclude Shaq without Kobe, Kobe without Shaq. You can't exclude Pippen from Jordan. And in this case, I feel that you can't exclude Klay Thompson from Steph Curry. Famously, one half of the Splash Brothers. One of the all-time great three-point shooters, and I think part of the ridicule with him or why he wasn't included is because I do believe that some people believe that he's a beneficiary of just playing with Steph Curry. But like anything else, the A player needs the B, the number one needs the number two, and I think it was very unfair that Klay was not included. His career has been derailed by some injuries the last couple of years, but he has made a comeback, and quite frankly, they're thinking about winning another championship in Golden State. I believe as the more hardware that he obtains, he will ultimately get his due, but he belongs on this list, and that's why I put him here. At 47, I've got Chris Paul, originally with the Charlotte Hornets, moved around the league a bit the last few, but, finally making an NBA Finals last season, coming up short to the Milwaukee Bucks after being up 2-0. I think as far as a point guard goes, Chris Paul has basically done everything. On a professional level, I feel that he's done it all. The only thing missing from his career would be that elusive championship. But when I think about the greatest point guards, it is impossible to not put Chris Paul basically on any top 10 list. It kind of gives me the vibes of when Jason Kidd was getting old, but still playing at a very high level, a Steve Nash type player. Definitely the best point guard of this particular generation, and I don't even think that's really up for debate. Chris Paul undoubtedly belonging on this list, and that's why he's here. At number 46, I've got the Worm, Dennis Rodman. Towards the latter part of his career with the Chicago Bulls, not the biggest offensive contributor, but the way that this man was able to dictate outcomes of games by basically just being all around the rim, always getting rebounds, and just kind of being a pesky defender where the Bulls would be comfortable putting him on team centers when Rodman was undersized as a power forward. The most dominant rebounder in my lifetime, undeniably Dennis Rodman. Earlier in his career, he was a big cog in the very famous Detroit Pistons Bad Boys teams that won back-to-back NBA titles, and also in 3 playoff series got the best of Michael Jordan, which not many can claim to do. Only really 2 teams during the Jordan era got the better of him, the other being the Boston Celtics just a few years earlier in the 80s, where the Pistons basically were the final team that Jordan had to get by until he took over the league and essentially became the NBA's greatest winner, or at least the best modern-day winner. Dennis Rodman, a phenomenal player. In between his stints with the Bulls and Pistons, he was with the San Antonio Spurs. It didn't go as well for him. I think part of what helped Phil Jackson get the best out of him was that he allowed him to be himself. Dennis Rodman was a very eccentric personality. At 45, we've got Rick Barry, a former NBA Finals MVP. Another one of the true greats. He was the Finals MVP in 1975. This, for 3 decades, was a record, which is really phenomenal. 40.8 points per game. That record in the finals lasted for over 3 decades. One of the most identifiable parts of his game was that he had a very awkward shot. He shot underhanded from the free throw line for a career rate of 88%. Also played with the great Wilt Chamberlain for some time with Golden State. Interesting thing that happened in his career was that he actually left the NBA to play in the ABA, which is rare. It's usually the other way around. He played for his former coach, Bruce Hale. A lot of people thought that he might have been on the tail end of his career, and he actually led the ABA that year, 34 points per game. He had sons that also played in the NBA. One of the true great scorers, offensively, not really anyone better. Rick Barry was truly awesome in his era, but the fact that that record lasts 3 decades is pretty phenomenal. Very familiar with this next guy. Number 44, Reggie Miller. Truly the Knick killer in the 1990s. I think playing in a small market, Miller's talents were kind of under the radar for a good while. I believe that he actually rose to superstardom during the 1990s when it seemed like just about every year he faced the New York Knicks, and playing in the Mecca, Madison Square Garden, I think it really put him on the national stage, and people realized just how great of a player Reggie Miller was. What he will always be remembered for was just being a clutch shooter and just having a ridiculous desire to win. Unfortunately for Reggie Miller, he never did win a championship, falling victim to the New York Knicks, as I already mentioned, also the Orlando Magic, and of course the Chicago Bulls. A lot of players in the Michael Jordan era did not win championships. He was very close numerous times, finally broke through to the finals in 2000, losing to Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant's Lakers in 6 games. Crazy thing about Reggie Miller, and as great of a basketball player as he was, he would never stake claim to being the best player in his family, because he would always tell anyone, and even at his Hall of Fame induction speech, that Cheryl Miller, his sister, was actually the greatest basketball player in the Miller household, but just a phenomenal player. And when you think about guys that you want having the ball for a do-or-die situation, I feel that Reggie Miller is always a candidate. Truly great player. At number 43, we have John Havlicek. He played on the famous Celtic teams alongside Bill Russell. Kind of revolutionized the 6-man position. But the crazy thing with John Havlicek is that only 2 players have more rings than him, and they are his 2 teammates, Sam Jones with 10, Bill Russell with 11. Havlicek himself had 8 championship rings, and behind him would be Robert Horry, who has 7. But one of the true revolutionaries of the 6-man position, and also a swingman, where during that era of basketball, he really caused a lot of matchup problems, being able to play both shooting guard and small forward. John Havlicek, a player that was well ahead of his time. Moving it over to big men, we got Moses Malone. Malone impacted multiple organizations and played at a high level. He, of course, played with the Houston Rockets with a young Hakeem Olajuwon, in addition to playing with the Philadelphia 76ers with a young Julius Erving. And if I'm not mistaken, I also believe that he did play with Charles Barkley. I will fact check that. But in an era where big men ruled the league, Moses Malone, you can definitely consider for a few years of his height, definitely a top 2 to 3 center in the NBA. Going back, I would say that maybe for a couple of years, the only center that was more impactful than him would probably be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Just a real presence around the rim, excellent rebounder, excellent defender, just a nose for the ball, truly one of the better centers of all time. And I would have to say that more than likely on any top 10 centers list, Moses Malone makes my list with ease. Keeping it over at the center position, this is more of an undersized center, Willis Reed. Last link to a Knicks championship team, he will always be remembered for his heroics, defeating the LA Lakers, coming back from injury. Basically just a true staple, and prior to Patrick Ewing, considered the greatest center in Knicks history. Playing on underneath head coach Red Holzman with very unselfish Knick teams, which featured Walt Clyde Frazier, Earl Monroe, just some really excellent Knick teams. That backcourt alone was phenomenal. Willis Reed, easy shoe-in for top 75, and Knick lore, top 5 all-time Knick. Keeping it on the theme of big men, Anthony Davis, NBA champion with the Los Angeles Lakers a couple of years ago while they were in the bubble. The only thing holding him back from being an all-time top 10 center, I would say, is health. If Anthony Davis continues to play and just stays healthy, I think that he will ultimately be a top 10 center of all time. I believe that's his only holdup. I'm basing this on the trajectory of where I think he's going to end up. But winning the championship in the bubble alongside LeBron James 2 seasons ago, they are nowhere near doing that right now. But, you know, Davis was a focal point in getting signed with the Lakers. He wanted to get out of his previous situation to finally win a championship. He was able to do that. But Anthony Davis just, you know, truly imposing figure when he plays inside the paint. One of the few centers in today's game that still plays similar to guys before his time with the power game underneath, and also just a strong defensive prowess. But like I said, the only thing that can stop him from climbing any higher would be injuries, and he has had a deal of them lately. Earl Monroe, another former Knick, helping them win a 1973 NBA title. Earl Monroe was truly one of the great players in his time. In 1972, he kind of struggled acclimating to the Knicks offense. A lot of people were worried that him and Walt Clyde Frazier would not be able to coexist. They lost an NBA Finals to the LA Lakers in 72, 4-1. But a year later, he was able to elevate his game and run it back with the Knicks and defeat the Lakers the very next year. That's a Lakers team that featured Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain. Really an interesting career trajectory. As famously stated in the He Got Game movie, Denzel Washington, who played Jake Shuttlesworth in the movie, made references to him, but also saying how the Knicks kind of held him down, whereas he was able to really be the more thorough offensive player when he was with the Washington Bullets. But Earl Monroe has his fingerprints all over Knicks history. And I do believe that for the better cause, the bigger cause, winning a championship, he did kind of put his offense to the side where statistically I think that when you look at his trading card, it doesn't get as much as it probably should, but Earl Monroe definitely belong in here. At 38, I've got the glove, Gary Payton. In my opinion, the greatest player of the former Supersonics, who are now the Oklahoma City Thunder, was able to win an NBA championship in a supporting role on the 2006 Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade, Shaquille O'Neal, Udonis Haslem, White Chocolate, Jason Williams. But I would say at the peak of his career, he played Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals. It appeared that after being down 3-0, he finally started getting some momentum in the series. The two-headed monster of he and Shawn Kemp were one of the most dominant in the 1990s. Like many players, unable to win a ring during the Michael Jordan era, but sticking around the league long enough, it was good to see him win one. And on my previous listings of all-time greats, he was on that same team, as I mentioned, with Alonzo Mourning. Two guys who both were very deserving of rings. Great overall point guard, but I would have to say that his absolute strength was basically just playing man-on-man defense, where he had great hands and just really gave all great offensive players fits, point guards, shooting guards. He was never afraid of any challenge, whether it be height-based. He was always in the mix to guard pretty much anyone. At 37, I'm not even going to attempt to say his last name, but his first name, and as everyone knows him around the world, is Giannis. Last year's NBA Finals MVP for the Milwaukee Bucks, which was huge for his legacy because the previous year, in my opinion, and in many others, the Milwaukee Bucks had the best team in the NBA, but they were denied in the bubble, having a short exit at the hands of the Miami Heat. This past season, he was able to defeat Chris Paul's Phoenix Suns after being down 2-0. Giannis really doesn't have any holes in his game. He's silky smooth around the rim. He can play the power game, but he can also beat you with speed and with a finesse touch. Also just a great overall scorer, a great leader. And one of the things that many people were proud of with Giannis winning his NBA title last season was that they didn't do it with a super team. And, Milwaukee is not exactly the most sexiest of basketball destinations. That was their first championship since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was formerly known as Lou Alcindor. Lou Alcindor / Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the last player there that won. They did get close in the Ray Allen era. But Giannis, in my opinion, in today's NBA, is the overall best player. A lot of people would argue Kevin Durant. I feel that Giannis has the total package, and I think that's the reason why he's on this list and why he belongs here. At number 36, James Worthy. Before I even get started with his NBA career, I want to make mention of one thing that's very interesting and a lot of people lose sight of. Michael Jordan is considered the greatest basketball player the world over all time, and well-deservedly so. But during Jordan's college years, this man, James Worthy, was actually the focal point and the best player on those North Carolina Tar Heel teams. Worthy was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers, where, in my opinion, in many ways, he was the heart and soul of the team, taking a lot of bumps and just taking a lot of pressure off of guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson. Definitely their number 3 option on offense. Later in his career, after Jabbar retired and Worthy was also aging, I guess you could say he was promoted to the number 2 offensive player behind Magic Johnson. But without James Worthy and, pre-real free agency days when things were not as frequent with players leaving, I guess you can say in the 80s that was a legitimate big 3, Worthy, Jabbar, Magic Johnson. But James Worthy, always remembered as a member of the Lakers during the Showtime era and their great rivalry with the Boston Celtics. And that rivalry was a lot more important than just wins and losses. In my opinion, it actually saved the NBA. James Worthy on my all-time list at 36. At 35, I've got the Ewing highlight reel. I'm talking about Dominique Wilkins, one of the great pure scorers in all of NBA. I want to get something negative out of the way first. I think one of the worst trades in NBA history had to be 1994, when the one-seeded at the time Atlanta Hawks experimented by trading their franchise player Dominique Wilkins to the lowly LA Clippers in exchange for Danny Manning. In my opinion, that's the last time the Hawks truly had the best team in the NBA. And the end result was a second-round exit at the hands of Reggie Miller's Pacers. Another tough one for Neek, losing a very famous dunk contest to the great Michael Jordan. Very controversial. A lot of people believe that Jordan got the nod because the dunk contest was in the old Chicago Stadium. Round the rim, basically could do anything on offense. When I think of today's players, I think a player that can be compared to Neek in a lot of aspects would be Jay Morant. But Dominique Wilkins, never a champion. I do believe that it was terrible that the franchise that he carried on his back for so long did deal him. Interesting story about Dominique Wilkins also is that his lone year and the last stage of his career in San Antonio was a season that David Robinson got injured. That in turn, with Neek and a lot of guys that didn't belong starting that year, they kind of tanked and were able to draft Tim Duncan. But Dominique Wilkins, undeniably one of the true great scorers of the 80s and 90s, and deserves to be on this list. At number 34, we've got the Iceman, George Girvin. One of those players that really transcended into the NBA through the ABA, while his San Antonio Spurs made the jump when they had the merger between certain ABA teams and NBA teams. He was actually on the Spurs when they crossed over into the NBA. He has a former record, 33 points scored in the second quarter, and prior to Michael Jordan, had the most league scoring titles. Around the rim, very creative scorer, popularized the finger roll, and prior to David Robinson and Tim Duncan, literally the greatest player in Spurs history in the later part of his career. As some might remember, in The Last Dance, he did play briefly with the great Michael Jordan, a very young Michael Jordan with the Chicago Bulls, but nowhere near the impact that he had with San Antonio. Just a great athlete ahead of his time, George Girvin. At number 33, we've got Jason Kidd. One of the true great point guards, just great court vision. He started his career in Dallas. It wasn't the smoothest beginning to his career. He had some issues with teammates like Jimmy Jackson, as well as Roy Tarpley and Jamal Mashburn. Just young, wasn't all that mature at the time. During his time with the Phoenix Suns, very exciting backcourt with Penny Hardaway, who had left from Orlando. But I would say that the peak of Jason Kidd's career, where he truly became a leader, a superstar, and that kind of factor to a ball club, has to be when he was with the New Jersey Nets, taking them to 2 consecutive NBA finals. After that, he was able to finally win an NBA championship with the Dallas Mavericks against LeBron James, Dwayne Wade's Miami Heat. That was the first year that Wade and LeBron joined forces. That was Jason Kidd's first and only championship alongside Tyson Chandler and Dirk Nowitzki. And later, the last season of his career made such an impact on the New York Knicks that it's truly the last time that they had a chance to win an NBA title. But Jason Kidd, one of the true great point guards, and more than deserving to be on this list. 32, Clyde Drexler, former college teammate of Hakeem Olajuwon. Latter part of Clyde Drexler's career, he reunited with Olajuwon to help him win a second NBA title in Houston. He was not on the 94 team. He contributed as their number 2 scorer to defeat Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway's Orlando Magic 4-0 in 1995. Prior to that was the franchise cornerstone for the Portland Trail Blazers. And what's interesting, Drexler had already been in the league with the Trail Blazers. And in the very famous draft of 1984, the Portland Trail Blazers decided to skip on drafting Michael Jordan in favor of Sam Bowie because of the fact that they had Drexler. Jordan also being a two guard. He was able to take his Portland Trail Blazers to the NBA Finals twice, losing in 1992 the Detroit Pistons and again in 92 to Michael Jordan. You can make more than a case that for a good chunk, probably 5 to 7 years, he was the second best shooting guard in the NBA besides Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan clearly did get the best of him in those 92 finals to kind of end any and all discussion about who was better. At number 31, we have Bob Cousy. Short and sweet. He was the point guard for the Boston Celtics. Those same Boston Celtics that won an enormous amount of championships in the 60s. In my opinion, the first true good point guard. The thing about those Red Auerbach teams, Celtic teams that were so great, is that they emphasized team at any and all cost. And Bob Cousy was the ultimate facilitator. Phenomenal champion. And one of the staples in what started to make the NBA such a phenomenal sport. At number 30, I've got Nate Thurman, the original player to achieve a quadruple double. Third all-time single game rebounds, 42, behind only Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. 7-time All-Star. One of the biggest praises of his career is that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar referred to him as the toughest defensive player he ever won against. Keeping on the theme of bigger, imposing players, the Admiral, David Robinson. One of the NBA's 50 all-time greatest players, once again cracking the list at 75. During his tenure in the NBA, top 2 to 3 center, was not able to get over the hump and win a championship until a young Tim Duncan helped him defeat the New York Knicks in 1999. A dream teamer, one of the real good guys in the NBA. And I would honestly say that during the peak of his career, no one better, really. His best game as a professional, scoring 73 while with the San Antonio Spurs. But an injury to him is ultimately, in my opinion, what helped him win a championship, because there's no way that Tim Duncan and David Robinson play together were it not for Robinson getting hurt, as I had already alluded to. The Spurs kind of tanking out. But David Robinson, a 2-time NBA champion, they defeated the New York Knicks and also defeated the New Jersey Nets to win those 2 NBA titles. At 28, I've got Kevin Garnett. In the beginning, came up with Steph Marbury with the Minnesota Timberwolves. A lot of people look back and say a lot of championships could have been won if those two were more mature and able to get along. That was not the case. Garnett was able to stack his legacy up when he joined Paul Pierce and Ray Allen as the big three for the Boston Celtics, defeating Kobe Bryant's Los Angeles Lakers in the 2008 NBA Finals. Garnett, slightly undersized in sense that he was skinny. Great speed around the rim, great moves, had a potent perimeter game, and one of the most famous trash talkers in all of NBA history. Sadly, Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce no longer speak to Ray Allen, as they did win a championship together. There were some hard feelings with regard to Ray Allen joining the Miami Heat after being a part of that Celtic championship team. Hopefully down the road they do make up, but Kevin Garnett, big ticket. One of the first NBA players to jump from high school to the pros, and he was NBA ready. Guy has always just been a phenomenal player, and even evolving into a bit of an actor. He starred along Adam Sandler, and that was a hell of a movie. At number 27, we have Pete Maravich. Pete Maravich tragically died at 40 years of age. He, post-career, he had his final year in the league. He played a season with the Boston Celtics, 1980. It was just before they started approaching that dynasty territory. Interesting stat on Pete Maravich. He is the all-time NCAA leading scorer. And another interesting tidbit on his offensive prowess is that he accomplished basically all of his scoring prior to the advent of the three-point line. Pete Maravich definitely was a player ahead of his time. At 26, I've got Scottie Pippen, the revolutionary player for what we call the point forward position. In my opinion, his biggest accomplishment in his career was helping the Chicago Bulls win their first NBA title. His first of 6 alongside Michael Jordan. He shut down Magic Johnson in that series. And while Michael Jordan will always get a lot of accolades, as he definitely deserves, Scottie Pippen, undeniably the greatest sidekick in NBA history, the greatest number 2 player in NBA history when we talk about teams that had dynasties. Unfortunately, one of the things that Pippen will be remembered for was refusing to go into a game in the 1994 season. That year, Jordan was not playing with the Bulls. Tony Kukoc got the final shot against the New York Knicks. They won the game, lost the series. But I'm willing to go as far as saying this. If Scottie Pippen doesn't get hit with a very ticky-tack foul call against Hubert Davis from Hugh Hollins, I actually believe that the Chicago Bulls may have very well been in the finals for a 4th straight year. They had a three-peat. Mike retired and then came back in 95. At times, I almost believe that the NBA did not want the Bulls to win the championship without Michael Jordan. Take that as you will, but I said it. Scottie Pippen, just a smooth ball handler. The Bulls never really had a traditional point guard during their dynasty years, but Scottie Pippen served as the main ball handler. Second best scorer on the team, of course, behind Michael Jordan. Top flight defender. One of the best defenders in the NBA during the Bulls dynasty years. One of the most unfair contracts also in NBA history. Against advice from ownership, Pippen was told not to take the first deal that the Bulls offered because it would not be renegotiated. I understand he had to do things to help his family, but grossly underpaid given how productive he was. And in many people's opinions, myself included, during the height of his career, a top 5 NBA player, 6-time champion. Scottie Pippen has pretty much done it all on a basketball court. A lot of people don't know this, but he actually has more playoff wins with the Bulls than Michael Jordan does, given Jordan's retirements. Guy that I'm very familiar with, Patrick Ewing, the greatest New York Knick of all time, greatest scorer in Knicks history, helped win a national title with the Georgetown Hoyas, almost won another one, but that would be a theme during his career. Lost in college to Michael Jordan, and that was his main adversary as a pro. Many people feel that if Ewing's Knicks played in any other era, he likely wins an NBA title. Closest he ever got to winning one, 1994, New York Knicks lost in 7 hard-fought games to the person he beat in college, Hakeem Olajuwon. One of the best shots of big men during the 90s and 80s for that matter. Great range on his jumper. Excellent imposing will around the rim. The heart and soul of the Knicks, and a lot of people do feel, looking back at his Knick years, that he never truly had a number 2 superstar. Pat Riley's Knicks were similar to the 80s Pistons, where stingy defense and basically were built to make sure that if you went into the lane, you were hitting the deck. Nothing came easy scoring offensively against the Knicks, but past Ewing, at times they did struggle finding that consistent number 2 scorer, and ultimately I think that's part of their undoing, why they never did win a championship in the Ewing era. But Patrick Ewing, undeniably, the greatest New York Knick. You take Reggie Miller and Michael Jordan out of the equation, I think he has a ring or two. Last but not least on this segment, the answer, Allen Iverson. I tell people this all the time. If Allen Iverson was Michael Jordan's height, he might have been the greatest player of all time. One of the sickest crossovers you will ever see. Very famous game during his early part of his career with the Philadelphia 76ers. He crossed over Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan hit the deck. Not too many people were able to do that to Mike. I would say the peak of AI's career was 2001, where he made his lone NBA Finals appearance. And something that stood out to me was how fearless he was. For a basketball player, rather small, skinny guy. But how many times he was not afraid to go at Shaquille O'Neal at the rim in that series. It's rare that you can lose a series, but the most memorable game is a game you won. And in that regard, it was game 1 of the NBA Finals. Philly won, and then the Lakers squashed them after that. But Allen Iverson, there's so many things you could say about him. We know he's a great scorer. We know he was a great ball handler. We know he had a lot of heart. But toughness, I think ultimately that's what separated Allen Iverson from other players. He essentially could play both the point and the two. I think he was more successful at being a two. Truly a natural scorer. And I do believe, like I said earlier, if he was just a little taller, I believe that he would have been possibly in the Jordan category. Famously, he came out into the NBA the same year as Kobe Bryant. There was a lot more buzz around Allen Iverson than Kobe, but looking back at that particular draft, no knock on AI, I think it's safe to say Kobe was the best player to come out of that 96 draft class. That's all I got for today with these NBA all-time rankings. I purposely am going 23 for my final players, 23 to 1. I have my reasons. I guess you guys could figure who I put as number 1. That's all for now, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. I'm going to get ready and head out to this Magic game.